Well, gender bias rears its head again. These are really made for people in suits with pants and a lapel. I have neither of those today. I should have thought it through. Good morning. Is it bothersome to you if I speak to you from down here, those in the back? I just feel a little more connected to you down here. I'm just going to grab my little clicker. Thank you, Reb, and thank you, Sarah. Yes, so don't read all that. It just makes me feel old. And I was at a conference last week on equity, and this group that I was in said, they referred to me as, you like a public health OG. You know, these were young. I'm like, old geezer? What is it? They laughed. Original gangster. I really couldn't remember what OG stood for. So I've been in the game a long time. That's all my intro and bio let you know. But I'm honored to be able to share with you some of the things I've learned, some of the opinions that I've formed, and I want to invite you to do the same thing. This conversation, this day, is a different day because you individually chose to be here. It would not be the same without you, because this is about building some collective meaning for yourselves, for the people you represent, for the work that I hope you feel privileged to do on behalf of and in community. So we'll dive in to some ideas. I'm going to start out reading a story. And it's entitled, A Durban Morning. The sun is low on the horizon in a lush and brilliant South African morning. The hills in the distance shimmer with 100 shades of green. On a dirt footpath, paralleling a dusty road outside of Durban, two men approach each other from opposite directions. Their history could be the history of any men and women meeting on dusty roads anywhere in the world. Each man brings a tribal heritage or a past that includes at least one violent chapter. Today, as they near the point of intersection, each is aware of the past difficulties between their tribes, and there's an instant of anxiety. The moment passes quickly, replaced by something much larger. As the men pause for a moment of greeting, the harsh history of the conflict between their clans and the more recent and equally harsh shared memories of apartheid simply become background for their wide smiles and their heartfelt salutation. Sawubona, says the first, I see you. Sikona, replies the second, I am here. And with this simple exchange, they bring each other into existence, for it is their belief that a person is a person only through human connection, through recognition one of another. Equity and the work of social justice is about seeing deeply, authentically, sincerely. It is not buying into the myth of color blindness, which negates the beauty of who we are, but it is leading with valuing and embracing and utilizing the different perspectives, identities, and lenses that we all bring into the room. When I was looking for some type of graphic or illustration for that story, I came across this picture, which was just amazing to me because it's the concept in Spanish, right? So it says, Sawubona, yo te respeto y yo te valoro y tú eres muy importante para mí. And the response, Sikoba, entonces yo existo para ti. Something about across nations and languages, this need to connect is preeminent to why we would take the time to drive to Pueblo to say, how can I be a part of the solution? So I'm going to share with you a little bit, just framing, I love your theme. So in partnering, let's talk a little bit about partnering for health. Now, these are kind of what I like to call the 4 basic food groups of health, right? Eat your vegetables, get your exercise, plenty of sleep, and go see your doctor. And we bought into this, right? Like this was the only way you stay healthy, and people that aren't healthy, it's because they are not doing these things, and they should. We now recognize that it was really about much more, which is why the diversity of disciplines and fields is so important for the dialogue. So it's about, what is the walk home from school like? Is it riddled with glass and rocks? Is it dangerous? Is it really far because there's not a bus stop for your school district? What is that walk like? What is the business district like? Is it boarded up? Is it not thriving, or is it beautiful and welcoming? What is the infrastructure of our homes? You all know I'm from Michigan, and we're battling through the horrible plight of families and children in Flint. What are we doing when we don't attend to the infrastructure where people live? What is the view from the backyard? And who decides to throw smokestacks back there? What are the decisions that we're making? And this one is particularly amazing to me because this is a LEED certified school at the top. Beautiful, available, cutting edge. And at the bottom, it is a school that was built next door to a county jail. Who makes those kind of decisions? And I would submit that it's almost hard pressed to figure out which is the school and which is the jail. So these are decisions that we are making. Martin Luther King, I love so many of his quotes, lived his life, indeed gave his life fighting for justice. And he says, I have the audacity, I'm going to get a t-shirt or something with audacity, I love that word. I have the nerve, he says, to believe that peoples everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, dignity, equality, and freedom for their spirits. We talk a good talk in these United States, and as the daughter of a military veteran who his entire work was for this nation, my brother is a West Point graduate, I hold this country to a higher standard because I love this country. I believe there's nothing more patriotic than our pushing this place to be the best place. So that's what partnering for health looks like. What does partnering for equity look like? And I just want to share, you all have these wonderful definitions in your packet. All of the definitions that we use in Michigan, we created in community with community. If you Google these terms, there's a gazillion definitions out there. You have to figure out what works for the personalities, the priorities, the values of the people that you work with. So this one, very similar to the one you have. I had the privilege of working, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation funded Paula Braidman, who's a researcher at UCSF, to construct a definition, and I had the privilege of being on her advisory board. And much like your definition, this equity thing is really about people having a fair and just opportunity for good health. It's not complicated. So when you say equity, be clear on what you're talking about. Yes, we are all pushing for the same thing. Everyone should have a fair and just opportunity for good health. I love the way Braidman also said that equity is like this moral, ethical principle that drives us to fight disparities. So it is a what, but it's also a how. It's not good enough for us to measure and describe all of these disparities. Health equity says enough is enough. We're going to do something about it. But you can't have that conversation in this nation without dealing with 3 pretty big elephants in the room. We have to be willing to talk about institutional racism, to talk about class oppression, poverty, to talk about gender discrimination. You're beginning to see things percolate in our society, right? #MeToo, all the discussions about pay inequities. We still talk about impoverished communities that are living, that are not impoverished by their own choices, but simply because of lack of resources. So these are the difficult parts of the discourse that have to be acknowledged. So if we come up with a shared vocabulary, we talk a lot, you know the term social determinants of health. We also push people to still talk about social determinants of health inequities. We want to start out with the hard stuff and then we can land at the easy stuff, but I love Margaret Whitehead's definition, and I love it because she invites values to the table. She says, yes, there are these differences in populations, but they are systemic, they are patterned, they are unjust, they are unfair, and they are actionable, as opposed to being caused by those people who become ill. They are actionable. People want to say, we can't fix racism. Yeah, we can. We can't fix poverty. Yeah, we can. We can. So this point of, it's not just about measurement. It's about looking at why is it, if you're on a Martin Luther King Boulevard in the United States, you're probably in, as we affectionately like to call it, the hood. You are in the poor part of the community. And then we thought we were being progressive in Lansing, Michigan, and we have a Cesar Chavez Road, but guess what? That's in the hood too. There are these patterns, like what? It's like, what is that? Why are all the beauty supply stores and the liquor stores like in the same part of town in every town you go to? Because it's pattern and it's systemic. And we're almost hyper-socialized to it. I mean, there are people sitting in a room saying, let's jack up a bunch of communities. No, there are always like these legitimate reasons. But until we start saying, and until you start becoming the person in the room that says, excuse me, have we ever thought about, excuse me, but it seems we will just continue. These are self-perpetuating. That's why Margaret Whitehead says they're systemic. So we wanted to push people away from, yes, the goal is social justice, but we didn't want to sit, excuse me, in the mom and apple pie space. A world which affords individuals and groups fair treatment, equitable, yes, lovely, lovely, true. We wanted to go with a definition that agitated us more. So for us, social justice was about the elimination of unfair, unjust advantage based on privilege, of race, class, or gender. We wanted to deal with the hard stuff and leverage that to land at the healthy stuff. So you might have heard this idea, this term of having an equity lens. We just, we were just the kids that, we don't mind being told no, but we just always wanted to know what the why was. So we kept saying, well, what does that mean? We should apply an equity lens. Use an equity lens. What does that mean? So this was the definition we came up with. We took the definitions that as a community we liked, and we just deconstructed them. So we said if we're using a health equity lens, we are seeking out what's unfair in order to reverse it or to avoid it. It's not an Easter egg hunt. Found one. We're not just seeking it out. We are looking for it in order to do something about it. We are aspiring to apply justice. What is right? What is true? What is important? We are seeking to apply that when we're serving communities. We are recognizing that for health, it's a very comprehensive thing. It's not just about clinical care. Health for us is really just about quality of life, about well-being, about what makes you feel content and at peace in your space. And social resources, not just clinical resources, are important. The choices people make are determined by the choices people have. Why don't you get out and walk more? Well, there's no sidewalks. There's no safe space for me to walk. Choices. And lastly, we recognize that it's our responsibility to not only identify, but to facilitate those opportunities for the families that we serve. Remember, we are recreating society right now. You are living in transformational times, which is a really privileged time. I tell my public health professional colleagues, once upon a time, we had gotten comfortable, right? We were taking care of polio and TB and all of those clinical things, unlike our predecessors who were fighting for clean water and clean air and making sure things were in place. We just rode their coattail. But now it's time for us to get back into transformational work, to make sure that everyone has, again, that fair and just opportunity. So we have this equity lens thing. So if we have a lens, where do we focus? Well, I think your thing gives you some hints. Partnering with people, and I want to challenge you. We're very good at othering, right? So we do these unanticipated things. We talk about the community like it's them over there and us over here. We forget that I'm pretty sure probably all of y'all live in a community, right? Everybody is a community person, but we sort of forget that. Or we do things like faith-based. Yes, I was at one meeting and they were talking about, I wish we knew someone that, could connect us with churches. Like, can I ask, am I the only person in the room that has a church affiliation? Oh, no, I have a church. I have a church. What are we talking about then? We are the answer that we're seeking, right? So, also, we often don't talk about communities until they have a problem that we, saviors that we are coming in to fix, right? So we problematize things. And I would submit to you, one of my research colleagues said that his community said to him when he came out, as we do, and I'll say that as a former researcher, we swoop in, we get the data, and then we go home. His community said, look, no decisions about us without us. I was like, right. I use that at work. I tell my managers, did you talk to the team? No decisions about them without them. How dare we? We are adults, and the people we are serving are mostly adults, or they live with adults. How dare we treat everyone in this egalitarian way like we are the experts? So communities really are about very resilient folk. I had said my research at Michigan State was on infant mortality and pregnancy experiences of black women as compared to white women. And I said if I stayed at the university, I was going to stop studying why are so many black babies dying at 2, 3, 4 times the rate of white babies before their first year. And I was going to start studying how are any black babies surviving and thriving. What if we find what works and start saying to communities, try this, do that, more of that, yes. Instead of going to communities and saying, that's wrong, you shouldn't do that, that's bad, why are you saying that? Who wouldn't get sick of us, right? So how do we see the beauty and strength of resilience? How do we see the solidarity in what they're doing, even when it's not necessarily what we would want them to do? How do we see that solidarity as a strength that we can then use in partnership? And community as power, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So partnering in community and with community, to me, looks more like community being defined by relationship and not by radius, these 4 blocks. Well, what if you live over here? Who has the relationship? Community is more about values, what's important, as opposed to a particular vicinity. Well, it's outside of my jurisdiction, so I can't do it. What is community in terms of our affinities? What do we share? What are the truths that we hold as opposed to vicinities? So, partnering with community, partnering with people, partnering for power, right? So I challenge you, we get a little bit nervous about that word, power. I want you to, one, recognize the power of relationships. One of my favorites, I describe myself as relationship-driven. I am a participatory decision maker. As a leader, I feel because I am the senior leader of the organization, the responsibility is greater for me to be more inclusive and participatory. Again, I don't make decisions about managers, project supervisors, or staff without including them. So relationships are how I get my job done. One of my favorite quotes says, by Richard David says, relationships are primary. All else is derivative. There's nothing we get done outside of a relationship. So the power of relationship, but also recognizing that relationships are complex and that power also brings with it lots of diverse, difficult histories that have framed relationships. What are the messages around power that are getting recurringly projected on us? And what does that do, even subtly, with our frame and our thinking? Most of the way we're socialized, and I am a sociologist, as Webb said in my introduction, nobody really, if I think about some gender things, and I grew up in a military family with Southern roots, and I am the only girl, so I didn't like get doors or chairs, and that didn't make me feel incompetent. It made me feel cared for, right? But my mother never sort of sat me down and said, here's how ladies cross their leg. But I noticed that if my brothers were crossed with their leg like this, and I sat down and crossed my leg like that, I would get the little look. And then I would try to figure it out, and I'd switch my leg, and then I'd get a big smile. So she didn't say, don't sit that way. She just, maybe because I'm in a dress, I don't know. We should put the men in dresses and then see what happens with leg crossing practices. But this idea that we are taught things very subtly, right? There's a lot of images right now on the news around gun violence, around immigration, that are just seeping into the psyche of this nation. So understanding that there are relationships and power. But power in and of itself is not hard. Power is simply about being able to get what you want. The ability to get what you want. So families that need healthy food for their children and can't get it, can't afford it, don't have access to it, lack power individually. So this issue of power goes from being powerless to having power over, where, of course, most of our experiences with power is people telling us what to do or preventing us from doing what we want to do. So understanding that power in and of itself is pretty simple. It's just about being able to get what you want. And what you want is based on kind of an issue of self-interest. So self-interest being what you want based on your values, based upon your experiences. Some want to be able to carry guns. Others want no one to be able to carry guns, right? So these are values. These are values. So the only way we reconcile the disparity of values is to let them all be in the room and honor and respect that they are all in the room. But what we've tended to do is to figure out, I'm not going to say that because then they're going to shut that down. So silence is one of the worst challenges that we have to effective dialogue. I was reading, I'm actually writing a chapter on dialogue right now, and I was reading this one sort of philosopher of dialogue, and he was inviting people to suspend judgment. So he was saying, you know, like, basically like we would think, don't judge people, just suspend judgment. I would submit that maybe what we should do is literally suspend judgment. Here's my thing. I believe in open carry laws because this happened to my grandmother. This is my value. I'm suspending it for you to see and for you to understand. Oh, okay. So then we get to this place of authentic relationship so that we can advance shared values that will change issues that contribute to poverty and racism and class oppression. Not being afraid. So understanding what is our self-interest. And self-interest was really hard for me because as someone who's relationship-driven, I'm also focused on others. There is one of my favorite quotes also says, prefer others more than yourself. So I'm not really going to do things to try to get my own needs met. I'm going to be trying to meet the needs of others. And so my community organizing colleague said to me, well, then that's your self-interest. Doing for others is your self-interest. Oh, I get it. So we all have a self-interest that helps us to inform power and what we're seeking together. So not to be intimidated by the power or the powerful. right? They just have greater resources to get what they want, and we don't. But power comes collectively. So the more you all as a group find some unity and some shared meaning, the more powerful you become. So partnering for purpose. And I want to just give you a couple of examples. I'm going to share you some quotes from these two leaders. Do you happen to be any nurses in the room? Not today. Well, I was raised by a nurse, so I'll stand in for nurses, but my faculty appointment was actually in the College of Nursing, and I came across this woman, Lillian Wald, who is considered the founder of public health nursing, community nursing, where nurses were leaving the clinics and going into the homes. And I also want to talk about Jon Snow, who's considered the founder of epidemiology, not Jon Snow from Game of Thrones, for those of you. I don't watch Game of Thrones, but some millennials explained to me that, it's really confusing when you talk about Jon Snow. We thought you were talking about, I was like, oh, so now I get very specific. No, he's a physician, a British physician. So here's a couple of quotes from Lillian. Lillian Wald was, again, this nurse. She was quite wealthy, from Jewish background. And so she says, "It's very pleasant to return to my old home. In coming back to Rochester, I inevitably compare the physical advantage of the children who are brought to manhood and womanhood in this environment with those of the children with whom my lot in life has been cast these many years." She chose to work in tenement housing in Harlem, New York. And she was doing Sawubona. I'm seeing these children and how different their lives are from the children in the area where I grew up. Another quote, she says, "Over broken asphalt, over dirty mattresses, and heaps of refuge we went. There were 2 rooms, and a family of 7 not only lived here, but shared their quarters with boarders. I felt ashamed of being a part of a society that permitted such conditions to exist. What I had seen had shown me where my path lay." How many times are we seeing horrific conditions, horrific things, and we are just saying, "Ooh, that's awful," and then we just go home? Sort of, wow, sucks to be you, glad I'm me, right? But Lillian said, I cannot in good conscience. I cannot in good conscience. And even she was saying, when it was time for postpartum visits, 6-week checkups for women with new babies, she would say to her supervisors, this is all from her reading of her archives, "Why are we making the women with these small babies come in to see us? Wouldn't it just be easier for us to go to their apartment?" "Oh, well, we can't do that." "Oh, the rules won't let us. The department won't allow it." Who? That's what I'm all like. You want to drive Renee crazy. Come to me with a problem and say, "Well, the department said no." The department? Really? The department has a mouth now? Who said it? "Well, the system, the rules say it." Okay, who read the rules? Come on now, I'm a relationship person. I need to know who to call, because we should call when the rules get in the way. So anyway, Lillian Wald said, "Yeah, I'm not for that. We're going to try something different." This, amazingly, she says, "It is a serious loss to the individual child to have free food kitchen associated with the school. His most precious gift, a foreign-born, is the absence of class distinction in the public school, the stronghold of democracy." So she practiced in the early 1900s. Lots of immigration in New York. And I'm sure some well-intended people said, "This is great. Let's have free breakfast for the kids, and they can just come in early." And she said, "How dare we label them?" So it's like, if we're going to do free food for immigrant kids, let's do free food for everybody, so that they don't have to walk in looking impoverished, or poor you, we had our yummy porridge at home, and you have to come get. Well-meaning, well-intended, poor outcomes. So it's not about what we intended. It is about the impact of our decisions. So I just submit that we've got to get a little more courageous, just like Lillian Wald. Be that, you know, half of y'all were the annoying kid in school that kept saying, but why? But why? How come? Resurrect that inner questioner. John Snow was a physician, a young physician in London, and he just noticed people kept coming in with the same symptoms, the same profile. This was right during the outbreak of cholera. So he said, we need to figure out what's happening. He wrote up some of his findings, published a couple of things. His colleagues were all criticizing him. He was going out in the community, in the neighborhoods, talking to people, asking them where they get their food, where they get their water. And they were all saying, you are out of your lane. And he said, I just can't keep patching up people and sending them back out. So he started asking questions and figured out that the shared water source was this place called the Broad Street Pump that was contaminated. So it wasn't good enough for him. You know, he went to elected officials. We've got to get rid of the pump. They're like, just tell people not to use the pump. No, we have to get rid of the pump. What if we miss someone? So there is now a memorial or a monument to where the Broad Street lie and John Snow's work to get rid of it. And this quote, he says, you and I may not live to see the day, and my name may be forgotten when it comes. But the time will arrive when great outbreaks of cholera, and I would say when great issues of health disparities and inequities will be things of the past. And it will be the knowledge of the way in which the disease is propagated which will cause them to disappear. Once we recognize why racism still impacts all of our lives, regardless of our skin color, we are all less than our best selves because of a history of oppression that we never dealt with. In South Africa, when they ended apartheid, they created this thing called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And it was designed to try to build relationships, to deal with this horrible, ugly past. In the United States, we changed laws and we took down signs. No more coloreds here, whites here. We dealt with the laws. We did not deal with the hearts. And this is both head work, what we know, and heart work, how we feel. And you have to work really, really, I mean, something as simple as tattoos, right? I was a really anti-tattoo kind of person till my son got a tattoo. Then I'm like, geez, now you're messing with me because I really love you. And you have a tattoo. So now I got to change my opinion of people with tattoos. Wow, do you mean I could actually maybe love other people with tattoos like I love you? What are we exposed to and what are we willing to allow ourselves to embrace and to open up? And are we willing to say the consequences of this stuff still affects us? It just does. And what am I going to do to be a part of it? So, people, power, purpose, what now? I would submit three things to you. One, we need to think about seeing differently. Right? To whom much is given, much is required. Seeing differently. You might not be able to see this as clearly, and I have no problem with these slides being shared if you guys want to distribute them. But a couple of summers ago, the American Red Cross put out a pool safety poster. Wonderful. I like people being safe in the pool. The challenge was that all of, and they did this, it be cool, follow the rule. So all of the cool behaviors were white kids. And all of the not cool behaviors were brown kids. This is how racism still affects us. We completely missed it, right? And I'm not even saying there might have been black or brown kids, people in the room creating the poster. So taking your turn on the diving board, cool. Playing nicely, not splashing, cool. Pushing kids into the pool, bad little brown kid, not cool. Running on the side, bad little brown kid, not cool, right? So we missed it, whomever. I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt. I know American Red Cross is pretty diverse. I'm going to say that they had people of color, but we are all socialized. I was so pleased yesterday walking through the Denver airport. cute little white girl with curly blonde locks. She was adorable. And she was holding on to her little brown baby doll for dear life, trying to keep up with her mom. I'm like, that was an intentional decision that mom made. And I really just wanted to stop her and say, I can figure out a way to say it without sounding a little stalker-ish. I'm so happy that your daughter has a brown doll. That just blesses me so much as a brown doll. I let her go, and I just figured I'd have that more moment in my heart. So, seeing differently, saying differently. What are the words that are coming out of our mouths? And we often stifle this dialogue because we don't want to say the wrong thing, right? Nobody wants to be called a racist. Nobody wants to be called, if I can dare use this slang, as an African American, an Uncle Tom. Why are you siding more with white people? Why do you talk like a white person? Nobody wants to be othered, right? So what can we say that's different? And I would submit that this is not about what we know. I said that earlier. It's about what we feel. It's about what we think. And when we train facilitators to do our dialogue sessions, usually they'll say, I'm not ready, please don't assign me yet, because I feel like I don't have all the answers yet. And then we say, well, then you're ready. Because this work is not about the answers, it's about the questions. It's about pushing us collectively to say, well, what about this? Well, what about that? How could we eliminate poverty? Well, let's think about just in this community. What could we do that would make, it's the questions, right? Not the answers. So I would submit in our field, certainly in public health, we need to start questioning the questions. We're not asking the right things. So instead of just saying, why do people smoke, which is an important public health question, we should say, what are the social conditions and the economic policies that predispose people to the stress that causes them to smoke? Who lacks health care coverage? These are all important questions. But what are the policies that would redistribute health resources more equally? And I would submit, even being intentional, sometimes when I use that, people will say, well, redistribute. During the last election, people would say, redistribute, that sounds like some Bernie stuff. No, it's actually just math. Like, I have pie, I don't need the whole pie. You want some pie? You want some pie? Let's just distribute things more equitably. How do we create communities? So it's all kind of, what is the question behind the question? And if the question seems confusing, then just keep asking why. So-and-so cut his foot and got tetanus playing at the vacant lot. Well, why was he playing at a vacant lot? Well, because there's not a playground in this community. Well, why is there not a playground in this community? Oh, well, because parents, tax base, whatever it is. Oh, well, why is you just keep asking why. And it gets you to the root cause that's solvable. So, question the questions. Seeing differently, saying differently, and ultimately doing differently. There was research by Howard Koh, who was a former assistant secretary of HHS, and he said there's two interesting things about public health leaders, and I would say about social justice leaders. Bless you. Generally, they are driven by a profound and a fundamental sense of mission. They just want to accomplish something. They don't want just a job. I tell my staff, bring your whole self to work. This whole dichotomy of your professional self and your personal self, what a myth. If you're having a bad day at work, guess what? When you get home, your kids are going to know it. If you're having a bad day at home, I'm going to figure that out. We're like, well, what is wrong with you? We figured it out. We are the same person. So there's this sense of mission, like Lillian Wald and like Jon Snow said, no, I could just sit here and do every day what they taught me to do the way they taught me to do it. Or I could say, my whole self won't allow me to continue to do it in that way. Let's try this. Let's push. And I love this last quote that Howard Koh says, there's something about these leaders, they have such a sense of purpose that motivates them to leave the comfort of the sideline and to wade into controversy. This is going to be controversial, this work you're talking about doing. One of our staff who was at our workshop, we do a 3-day workshop on facilitated dialogue around health equity, and so she was saying that she was on a camping trip, white woman on a camping trip with about 8 of her friends, and they were starting this conversation. They're like, well, what'd you do this week? Oh, I went to this workshop. We talked about racism. We talked about all this stuff. So they start having a very passionate conversation. So another woman who was, at the camper trailer or something, hears all of this. Oh, she comes running over and says, this conversation has to stop. That's what they did. First of all, you're not even in the conversation. And second of all,
why? Because you weren't invited?
Scared, afraid. Well, it sounds like you're arguing. Well, another quote I love says, come, let us reason together. Another translation of that word reason means argue the matter out. Let's come talk through the hard stuff and agree to stay at the table till we figure it out. Because privilege says, I don't have to listen to this. If you're hearing something that makes you feel uncomfortable, that should be your internal litmus test to say, this is something I should probably be hearing, because I'm uncomfortable. But we're taught, particularly in the current political discourse, we're not even having dialogue. Words are coming out of their mouths, and nobody's hearing them because I'm busy coming up with what are the words that are going to come out of my mouth. But we will never fix it. So I used to say this, I do this work because I don't want my sons to have to do it. My youngest son is graduating from college next month. So I guess I have to say I do this work because I don't want my grandchildren to have to do it. This is generational work, y'all. So, just a couple of things to increase your courage. I kept trying to figure out, I was getting really sick of sort of cowardly leaders. Like, they got all that power and privilege, they won't say anything. Why won't people speak up? Well, I came across this article that talked about risk-taking. And they said there's 4 reasons why people won't take risks, what limit them from taking risks. One is they overestimate the consequence, the likelihood that something will go wrong. I would go bungee jumping, but I'm sure the cord will break, and it's like a 1 in a 2 billion chance, right? It might break, but the likelihood that it's break is, but they're afraid, right? They overestimate the likelihood that something will go bad. The other thing is, they overestimate the impact of the consequences if something does go bad. If that elephant falls off that tightrope, oh my gosh, it's going to be such a... Maybe not. Maybe there's like mattresses down there, and it's actually going to fall on the mattress. It's not going to be that bad. It might go wrong, but you can handle it if it goes wrong. The third is we underestimate our ability to handle it when it does go wrong. Go hang gliding. You might end up in a tree, but you can handle it. Take the risk. And lastly, she says, and I would submit most importantly, we underestimate the consequences of inaction, of doing nothing. We are in a place in our society where doing nothing will just be additive to the negative that we are trying to change or that we're saying we don't want. We cannot just get into our households, close the blinds, and lock the door. We cannot. My colleague often says when talking about culture, a fish doesn't know it's wet until it's out of the fishbowl. It's just swimming around doing what it does. So I'm suggesting we need to get out of our fishbowl, take some risk, try some things differently. And you are the change agents. So let me just give you some take-home lessons, right? You have purpose. You can make a difference. You have power. You have privilege. You have influence. If you're in this room, you have privilege. Educational privilege, positional privilege, racial privilege, gender privilege. You have to figure out what your identities are. You certainly are employed. That's privilege. But you also have people. That's what my question says on the back. It says, who are your people? I got people. I don't have to do this by myself. I can call some folk and say, a lot of people will sometimes say, Renee, I don't know that I agree with you, but I love you, so I'm in it. Come on, what do you need me to do? How can I help? And you know what? As we go on the journey, then they finally say, now I understand why this is important to you. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for inviting me. So you have power, you have people, you have purpose. And the closing quote on Martin Luther King's Audacity quote usually does end with having education and food for their spirit and all of that. But the end of that quote, which less often is included, says, and I believe that what self-centered people, he said men, have torn down, that people other-centered can build up. Change does and can happen. I believe that you are people other-centered. But let me just close with encouraging you. This is going to be a heavy lift. But the Renee Kennedy translation of this verse says, don't get tired of doing the right thing, because we will all reap if we don't throw in the towel. We will all do better. Our children will do better. One day I want to be a grandmother retired to North Carolina sitting on a porch and my grandkids asking me, why did you have to do that? Like they paid you to do that? Because they'll just be incredulous that our history will be so historical and not repeated in our lived experiences. And I would not have flown all the way from Lansing to Pueblo if I did not believe it to be so. Thank you guys for your time. So, do I have time for questions? We're a few minutes? A little time for questions? Yeah. Okay. Questions, thoughts, reactions, opinions, ideas. Love. Aww. That's the idea, love. That's true. It is the motivator, is it not? It is the motivator. Okay, everybody take a deep breath. Think of one word that resonates in your spirit, in your heart, in your mind, having listened for the last hour. And some courageous person, if you don't have questions, share your word and tell me about it. Yeah. Hope. Say more. Ooh. Yeah.
It's been going on for a long. That's been going on for a long time. Like in the Apostle Paul again in Acts 17:21, he says, "For all the Athenians and strangers which were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing."
Absolutely.
And what matters is just the future. You know, past.
Yeah.
The past.
Absolutely. And find what is it that motivates you? What is it that motivates? This is old historical stuff that we've just not fixed. I see there, and I see a hand over there, and I want to acknowledge righteousness in the back. I heard you. Yes.
The word that came to mind is legacy. You know, I'm in that season of my life where I'm contemplating what kind of elder do I want to be. And so I'm just thinking about what kind of legacy do I want to leave.
Yeah.
And so your conversation really inspired me to stand firm, even though I'm in a real challenging space, to do this work.
You know, I often think, where would we be had Martin Luther King and so many of the other colleagues that were white allies, if they had thrown in the towel, where would we be, right? But you know they had to get tired. you know they had to be pulling their hair out. We had, in Lansing, Michigan, we have, amazingly, the oldest Martin Luther King Commission in the nation, and so they do a huge, probably 1,500, 2,000 people luncheon. So this year they brought in Diane Nash, who was a member of the SNCC, I forget what SNCC stands for, but those that help do the sit-ins and all of those things. So Diane Nash says that people would often ask her, why would you risk your life? Like, you guys knew that you were going to get fire hosed and people were going to dog stuff. Why would you do that? And Diane Nash, in January of this year, stood in that mic and looked silently at this entire auditorium and said, because we loved you. Yeah. We loved you. We knew that you were going to be worth it. And so we kept trying. Amazing. What do I have, one or two more? One or two? Am I shutting down? Okay.
So I'm interested in this idea of dialogue that
Yes.
you're doing in Michigan. So what advice would you give to Colorado if it wanted to start something similar?
Well, we hope to have this chapter published, if I can meet my deadline, before the end of the summer, I think is the goal. What I would submit to you, and one of the things that we preview on the chapter, one of the things that I say in the chapter is we had a conversation. We have people say to us all the time, we're tired of talking about this. When are we going to do something? Then I would submit, if you're tired of talking about a thing, then you need to transition to dialogue. Because dialogue is doing. It's about coming up with sort of this way of being, a shared meaning, and a methodology for action. Because if you don't come together collectively and you just start doing things, right, where there's no, it's not consensus. I hate consensus, because to me consensus means you didn't get what you want, I didn't get what I wanted, but we're just going to pretend like we're good. We're just going to settle. But it is, how do you let all those truths sit in the room together? And then how do you prioritize things? And it is a process. So there's that information coming out. I have a team of facilitators that does this work that would be happy to either talk with you on the phone or come out again. Yeah, but just keep in mind that the dialogue is a thing, and we call our method facilitated dialogue, because dialogue in some schools is this very neutral, open-ended. We do have a point of view. Like, we're not going to advocate dialogue on, female genital mutilation or something that we know is reprehensible and not healthy. So we have a point of view. This work sometimes public health will refer to itself as neutral conveners. I hate that term too. I've used hate twice. That's an awfully harsh word that I usually try not to use. But I don't like that term because we're not neutral in public health. We're not going to advocate for unsafe streets. It's called safe streets is what we advocate for. So we are excellent conveners. We're good. I would submit your very presence in this room is demonstration of how good public health is at convening disparate and diverse audiences. But then what are we going to do when we get in the room? When y'all do part 2 of this, and we do this thing called design thinking, where we just bring people together to say, okay, now let's sort out the action together. Do you have, I feel like that was a bit of a rambling answer, but thank you for your question. Yes?
I just had one question. This is all pretty new to me, and you covered a lot in your speech. I'd just like to know,
Just like to know if you could, your 3 biggest points that you'd like me to take away walking out of here as somebody who's fairly new to this, and I've come from the housing world with the Department of Division of Housing in Colorado.
Ooh, 3 take-homes. Let's see. Well, I would submit that we have to accept our history, that this nation was established by racism and oppression. Accept our history, embrace it so we can change and create a new history, and be willing to work together in different ways. A lot of people want to do equity work without talking about racism and classism and oppression. We have to talk about it, because it's still out there. It's still, I am in the process of facilitating some work at a large organization department in Michigan, where someone just in the last 3 months wrote in the elevator, this is an employee, because you have to have your badge to get in, kill in word in the elevator in 2018. So we have to accept our history. It is a history filled with lots of oppression. Even when we were a nation of immigrants, we were just really good at othering. So, right, the European Americans figured out ways, if you're Italian or you're German American or you're Dutch American, figured out ways to oppress and other based on difference. So figuring out that that's our history, that yes, there's some black folks that did well and there are some white people that are poor, but we still have disproportionate outcomes in every sector of our society. That is demonstration that racism, class oppression, gender discrimination still happens. So accepting that truth in order to change a history and be willing to come together across different sectors. Does that help? And remember, you're a change agent. Don't make me go back to my picture. Superman, and I went to see the Avengers already with my sons. I won't be a spoiler. One more, yeah. Okay.
Hi, so I'm going to get a little specific.
Yes.
So I work in leadership development, and I've been struggling in the space of trying to think of what are the leadership skills or the leaderful sort of actions or leadership attributes that you have seen, that you find in yourself and other people who are working in the equity space across sectors. Mm-hmm. So what are those? Because I want to teach them.
Well, I think transformational leadership is an excellent model. I think facilitative leadership is an excellent model. At my health department that I led, we had the core value of servant leadership. We also now at MPHI have that core value of servant leadership. Some people that don't understand the term hate it because they're like, I'm not a servant. I would submit that you are. My job is to make sure that my staff have everything that they need to succeed. My job is to facilitate their growth and their improvement and their self-gratification. That's what leaders do. Some leaders forget and they think it's all about them. It's really never about you as the leader. So those values complement social justice very, very nicely. I actually I'd love to share my card with you. That's my new passion. When talked about being legacy as we get older, that's what I want to do, is stop helping leaders be cowards and recognize that I had a great health officer when I was deputy. And he was always like, I'm not going out there. I'm not the face. I want the community to get to know you. You do the news interview. You, when H1N1 was happening, you go out, rally the troops, give them a pep talk, open the doors and let the community come in. I'm like, aren't you going to do that? No, I'm going to be here at the department. Call me if you need something. I'm here getting the data and shipping it out to you. This is your thing. What kind of leader is that? But an awesome one. So I grew in confidence. I had a leader when I was just starting my career in HIV, and we had an outbreak in a very small, conservative, predominantly white community. And I'm like 2 years out of school. And he sent me out there to do a talk. I'm like, I'm going to schedule it. I came and told him, here's where it is. It's going to be at the public library. They're expecting everything. He's like, great, let me know how it goes. What? You can handle this. You know a lot more about this than me. Care about the people and go for it. What? And it was great. He was right, and my confidence built. So now I tell people, no, you can do it. You believe me. You can be running this place. So thank you guys. This has been a great dialogue.